It's a pleasure, Tim.
Look, there's probably no brand in our country, I'm thinking, that's more iconic than the Wiggles for young and old. So how damaging is litigation like this to such a successful brand?
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Often the damage that's done to brands is exaggerated and it's relatively short term, but I think this is a special case in that we're dealing with the Wiggles who've got a very squeaky clean image,
Yeah.
the Wiggles who are children's entertainers, so that's a kind of a vulnerable set of consumers, if you like, and we're dealing with allegations that relate to discrimination. So that's, if it was found that, say, Anthony Fields, the Blue Wiggle, discriminated against this fellow, and that's just the allegation at the moment.
Of course, yeah.
Proved.
No.
But if it was found that he did, I think that would be damaging and potentially long-term damaging to the Wiggles brand.
Yeah, and we are going to stress, Alex and I, that it is an accusation at this point in time. But,
Right.
I mean, it's... the whole thing's built on that wholesome, family-friendly image. So, I mean,
Yes.
they must be thinking to themselves, that, how do we get ourselves into this situation? Yeah.
Yes, well, that's right. I mean, I think if my kids wanted to watch the Wiggles at the crack of dawn, I wouldn't hesitate to put them on just because the Wiggles are involved in some controversy. But when you're dealing with discrimination, the allegations in this case, could relate to discrimination on the basis of age, race, sexuality, gender, those sort of things, and that's pretty serious, and that's something that you don't want associated with children's entertainment. And so I do wonder how they got to the point of not settling this privately.
Well, yeah, good question. We're talking about Wiggles Inc., and of course their audience don't care about their corporate future, but if the court were to find discrimination by a Wiggle, how significant could that be, the fallout from that?
Yes, so certainly the damage, that would be a public finding. So if a court found it, and
Right.
It's in the federal court at the moment, so if there's a court judgment, that judgment would be public unless special arrangements were made. But normally those decisions are public, so that would come out. People like me and you would be commenting on it. So that would be very damaging. In terms of the actual damages award, it's probably not likely to be a whole lot of dollars. It really depends on how much this fellow was earning and how much lost earnings. So
Right.
if he say he's on $200,000 a year and it took him 6 months to get a new job, then the claim might be $100,000 a year. So it's actually probably it's not sheep stations in terms of the damages,
No.
the court damages, but the damage to the reputation, of course, could be far higher.
Yeah, correct me if I might be wrong, but I'm starting to think that Australians are starting to rush to litigations like the Americans do. But, I mean, what lessons should other companies take from this in terms of just managing the dispute before it gets to, litigation stage?
Yes, well, that's a good point. And certainly, look, there are similarities with the American market. I think there's lots of elements of Australian society that are heading in the American way. We're certainly behind America, and litigation here is different. The way the lawyers are paid and a whole bunch of things are structurally different. But certainly where we are sort of heading in that direction. The lessons, I think, for employers are twofold. One is you've got to have your processes right, and often these things aren't about substantive discrimination. They're not about somebody who actually said, look, I don't like you because of your age or gender or disability status or whatever.
Yeah,
often
right.
they're to do with policies and processes, that there wasn't a policy in place or there wasn't a process in place that meant that this fellow felt fairly treated. So it's about policies on one hand, and then on the other hand, it's about when things do come up, dealing with them proactively. And often, once someone's terminated, they just terminate and they walk out the door, whereas the termination process should be a back and forth process where you go and help them find a new job. And, say, look, this is not the job for you. You know that, I know that. Why don't we find something that suits you? So there's two things that employers can do to really to deal with this much better.
Yeah. And how often, Alex, is it the case? I mean, the person might not be after money, but just feels so wronged that they're after, an apology. Yeah?
Yes, and that absolutely. So often these things are driven not by money, but by a sense of offence, by a sense of injustice or being treated badly. And again, it's about the process. If the process is let's have a few meetings, talk about what's going well if you're dealing with a senior executive, what's going well with the senior executive's performance, what's not going well. I think often when somebody doesn't fit in or doesn't perform well, they would perform well and be happier somewhere else. And I think if that becomes clear, then that person will find a job somewhere else and find happiness somewhere else. You're not doing them any favours by keeping them in a job where they're underperforming.
Yeah, that's right. Well, on the show we've discussed, Rebel Wilson has been facing this as well. And you're talking about very high-profile people, particularly in the Wiggles. Should we say that, these sort of people, like the Wiggles, Rebel and whoever else, is very high-profile with a big image, should be very careful about how they operate at work and with other people, I suppose?
Yes, I think that's right. I think when you've got a public profile, whether you're an AFL player, whether you're a movie star, whether you're a children's entertainer, whatever it is, I think you've got to deal with your employment arrangements differently. And I think companies that employ in that area need to be more careful. And I think they're probably taking more advice from their media advisors than they are from people like me, because the reality is probably the fallout in public is much more important than the fallout in court.
Well, that's it. The reputational damage and the image to the brand. I mean, that would be important, surely, wouldn't it?
Yes, yes. I think in this case, particularly because you're dealing with kids entertainers and allegations. If this was some sort of complex corporate dispute, I don't think anyone would really pay much attention. Particularly parents with young kids, they've got more important things to worry about. But because we're dealing with allegations of discrimination, I think if it was found that someone at the Wiggles was discriminating on the basis of, say, disability, just as an example, I think that would be pretty terrible and really, really long-term damage. If that was the finding in court that a judge said, X Wiggle is doing X wrong, I think that would be very bad.
And do you know where the case is at, a Fair Work claim, and where it's at in the court as of this point in time? When does it get heard?
Yeah, it's very early stages. So at this stage, all that's happened is Mr. O'Neill has filed his application in the court, in the federal court. Right. Defence hasn't been put in, so the Wiggles have not put in a defence, and the other applicants have not put in a defence, and a mediation hasn't been set. But what will happen is there'll be a defence put in, and then a mediation date will be set pretty soon, and hopefully the whole thing will be settled at mediation, and that'll be the end of it. But if not, then the court will list it for a hearing, but that might not be for a year or two.
Yeah, well, just one more thing. I mean, you don't want to give in, and if it's going to mediation, I mean, both parties may feel like, well, I'm not giving in or giving anything away. Right. I just want to keep going. Well, is that likely, or how often does the mediation work, I guess?
Oh, yeah, it's very common. So most cases settle at or before mediation. Okay. Something like 70% of cases like this settle at or before mediation. So mediation is very successful. It's really in everyone's interest to settle at mediation, and mediation is a great process for where you have buy-in to the process rather than the judge tell you who's right and who's wrong. So it's likely to settle at mediation, or if not mediation, likely to settle before the final hearing. 97% of cases in Australia settle before final hearing. So the chances of this going to a final hearing are relatively low.
So it's not really a hot potato.
I thought we might.
I'm sorry.
That's right. It's not really. I think these things often they often sort themselves out, but they're very exciting in the meantime.
That's my dad joke for the day. Thanks for talking to us, mate. That was great. Thank you.
A pleasure, Tim.
Yeah, the Wiggles and their dramas. Partner at Taurus Legal Management, Alex Martin.